I would say we could get going if you'd like,
Great.
Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I will call the Water and Sewer Board meeting to order and ask Brenda to take the roll for us, please.
Board Member Boreski,
Present.
Board Member Freeman,
Present.
Board Member Jolie, present. Board Member Mercier, Board Member Ridley, present. Councilmember Russell,
Present.
Councilmember Ward,
Present.
Mayor Sierra, Vice Habernick, Vice Chair Habernick, Chair Moore.
Present. All right, thank you. All right. You know what, we did a little housekeeping item, and Brenda or Sarah, keep me honest. I think we checked on the alternate's position. So the technically is non-voting when we have a full house, voting when we need an extra person. Brenda, I think we're at 7, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So
But
technically,
I'm counting the alternate.
but
so-
we need 6.
Mhm.
So I should ask this beforehand. So is the alternate voting tonight or
Yes.
just okay, perfect. Thank you. And that was a question asked last week. I appreciate making me remember some of these rules. Along those lines, we'll do the approval of the minutes next. For those that were in attendance last time, could I get a motion to approve the minutes from the February 13th meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion, corrections, edits? All in favor, say aye.
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 Abstain. I think technically you'll abstain from this one.
Yeah, I need to abstain.
Cool, thank you. All right, motion carries. Next up is the public forum, and Brenda, do we have someone from the public tonight?
We do. Let me introduce Cian Dickerson. She's here in person.
Wonderful. Welcome this evening. Feel free to address the board. We ask that we keep public comments to 2 minutes a person, but please proceed.
The final draft should not be recommended to City Council as is. As the draft stands, many of the changes are inconsistent, contradictory, of questionable enforcement, and in many instances unconstitutional. For example, the definition titled M, customer service line, is inherently contradictory between 1 and 3, and 3 is clearly unconstitutional, saying all the plumbing inside the building are part of the customer side service line, but conflicts with 1, which says up to the first connection to the premises plumbing. Double E, premises, is defined as the tract of land with buildings thereon. Property and premises apparently meaning inside the building seem to be used interchangeably and inconsistently. 12-1B-8, user to provide curb stop, says every owner of property using water shall provide a curb stop on the service pipe outside of their premises. Whether property or premises, nobody can provide anything on somebody else's property or premises. There are also incomplete sentences and grammar problems causing confusion and inconsistency. I have protected myself against a variety of waterborne health hazards, including corromins, lead, fluoride, biological hazards. I have whole house filtration and RO water. I am not a hazard to anybody else's health concerning my plumbing and my fixtures in my house. But these purported changes to Title 12 and being forced by code to give written consent or be disconnected is a violation of my private property rights and therefore unconstitutional and should not be enforceable. The concerns above are just a few examples. There are many others, and low-cost drinking alternatives are available. Drinking water alternatives are available. I have a whole list of comments and other things that I'd be more than willing to share either in writing or publicly.
That just wraps up the 2 minutes on the timer.
Yeah, feel free to provide those in writing, and we can distribute that. We can distribute those to the board as well. Any clarifying questions for our guests? Otherwise, we could save discussion for a later agenda item. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment tonight?
No, that was the only one.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Next up, we'll move to agenda item 5A, the lead reduction program code changes, phase 2.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm here tonight to present the code changes that we are proposing to allow us to continue to move forward with the lead reduction program for the city of Englewood. And we talked about this at last month's meeting. We heard the board. We've also heard council. We've gone back and worked to address what we believe were the overriding concerns from the board and council. I think we have some solutions that ultimately will help to address those comments while not getting too prescriptive in the code, but also we have more flexibility. We anticipate having more flexibility on execution of the program based on new EPA regulations that are currently in development. So as we talked, some of this is going to be a repeat from what you saw last month, but essentially our program is we're trying to remove all the lead service lines in the city of Englewood. We recognize that there's a health hazard. Nationally, it's recognized as a health hazard. It's priority nationally. All you have to do is go back and look at Flint. That really highlighted this, and Englewood is not without a number of lines. We anticipate that it could be somewhere on the order of 3,000 out of our approximately 11,000 connections. What we are looking to do through this program is establish the program, establish the financial conditions that allow us to execute the replacements in a way that tries to minimize the impact on customers that do experience, have an issue with a lead service line. This also includes galvanized. That's the guidance from the EPA. So it's lead and galvanized. Both of those are within the program scope. And then additionally, we talked last month about the requirement for metered service. So we did split that out based on the request of, I believe it was council that I can't remember if it was here as a council, but I know the request was that we split those apart. And so we did that. So Sarah's going to present that next. And so we'll make sure that these stay bifurcated, even though there is a lot of consistency between the two. And then ultimately we just define where the city's responsibility is and where the customer's responsibility is. Next slide. We can go backwards.
Oh, we're going forward. Flip off here. Okay, hold on.
So we've worked on developing a customer acknowledgement form, and the way we've approached this is utilizing this form. We will attempt 4 outreach efforts with a property owner to engage with them to allow us to work with them to replace their lead service line. So the option is for the customers. So the way we're proposing the program right now is if we execute on the whole program, we believe that we would the city would come in and replace the city's responsible aspect of it and the customer's side of this. We do that all as part of the program funding. And part of that is because we're anticipating a significant amount of grant funding that will come in, which will help to offset those costs. If someone decides that they would not like us to replace their side, we will move on, and we'll put it into the title that it would trigger, so that if, let's say, someone just does not want us to come in and replace their line, and then that home sells, we don't want to we want to make sure that the next homeowner is informed to realize that, hey, you have a lead service line, it's a legacy line, because the previous property owner did not want us to access the property to adjust it. So we would keep a tracking of that to ensure that the next person who may want this gone because it is a health hazard is able to do that. And then there's a component in this that does provide enforcement if a homeowner was to try to prevent us from replacing the utility side of the lead service line. So that's the piece that is from the pipe to either the curb stop or the pipe to the meter pit if it's an outside meter set. And so as part of the program, we will replace all of those. The new information that we, as we took the feedback from the council and the board, we went back and looked at what our options were, and turns out that this is not unique to us. This is some of the issues that are happening nationally as it relates to these types of programs. And so the way the EPA has changed their approach and their new LCRI, which is the lead and copper rule improvements, which is it's currently in public comment. And so that identifies the 4 points of outreach. If after 4 points, the permission is not given, then the EPA now says we can replace the customer side of the line and leave the non-customer side for any customer that refuses to allow us entry for the customer side. And so that, we think, takes care of the issue that's been somewhat of a concern around this whole program. And it turns out that while that regulation is not fully adopted yet, we don't anticipate, I mean, it's in public comment, so who knows to what degree public comment influences those, but we think that this is likely where it's going to land, which then gives us that flexibility. So if someone absolutely refuses us to access to their house, we can continue to execute on the program and take care of the city's responsibility as it relates to the lead service infrastructure. And then the individual who refuses, we would leave that, track it, and then ultimately at some point in the future, it would be their responsibility to pay to remove that line. And so there's incentive if a homeowner wants it to be covered from a cost perspective, because that's how we've structured the program, which is similar to how Denver, well, actually it's the same as how Denver has executed their program. They chose to bear the cost as part of the utility. We think with the funding that we're securing, that we can propose that same kind of approach, which then minimizes the impact on an individual customer. However, if they refuse, then the opportunity to access some of that grant money is gone and it becomes their responsibility down the road. I cover everything on this. And then ultimately, if a customer does prevent our ability to replace the part that the city's responsible for, that's when we move forward with suspension of service, because that is a part of the system that we are responsible for. And our goal through this program is to eliminate the health hazard risk posed by lead. And to the degree we can do that throughout the water system and ultimately through the vast majority of individual customers throughout the city, we will do that. But for that handful that refuse to allow us access, we still need to address the city side of that. So here's where we're at from a timeline. You can see the red checks or the components from our regulatory requirements, what we have accomplished. And so we did the inventory. We provided that inventory accessible online. And again, remember, that's the machine learning where we did the potholing for 375-ish sites. And then we used the same program that Denver used to then extrapolate that to try and predict where lead is. Ultimately, when we replace the lines, we will confirm one way or another whether it is lead, because it's a machine learning, so it's not going to be exactly right. The only way to make sure that we're exactly right is to check it. So we will be checking Every one of those lines pre-1950, right?
1960.
Oh, pre-1960. Okay, so pre-1960. And then if you're post-1960 and you want us to come check it, we'll go check it for you. I mean, this is about customer health and safety. We want to be accommodating as a utility. Most of the data, if not all of the data that we're seeing out in the field shows that if you're post-1960, you don't have lead. And a lot of the post-1950 doesn't have lead, which is actually consistent with what Denver found. And actually, someone said something to me that earlier this week on it. I said, well, yeah, as soon as they didn't have to put in this heavy lead pipe, which is flexible, and they got to use a lighter material, all the contractors back in the 1950 immediately switched over to the new acceptable material because lead apparently is really heavy and hard to install. So that was an interesting anecdote that I heard. So as we move forward, you can see the compliance deadlines that are associated with the lead and copper rule improvement. Like I said, we anticipate those being adopted and finalized this fall. The compliance deadline is 2027, with an ultimate deadline of removal of all lead service lines of 2037. So we're ahead of the game, and we think that that's a smart thing for this utility because because we're ahead of the game, we have been able to get access to federal funding that there's no guarantee it'll be available in 5 years or 10 years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that later. I don't want to get into that yet because we might have some good news, but I don't want to say anything yet. But you can see where essentially what we're doing is we're going to take care of it now before we get into it being regulated on us to take care of it. And that's, been part of the effectiveness of having this proactive strategy that we're gonna take care of this health hazard in our potential health hazard in our water system. So remember when I talked about this about a year ago, we had or maybe this is a little bit, probably almost 2 years ago, when we went to serving 57,000 people. I remember we talked about we became a large utility because we now serve 57,000 people, 34 of which live here, and another 23 of which are non-transient people who come and go and who work in Englewood. That triggers what's called a corrosion control study, where we have to see and we have to test our system to ensure that we don't have lead issues in our system. So we went through that process. We did the study. We also did 2 rounds of 6-month testing, which we're allowed to do. And within that testing, we're going to get technical into regulatory stuff just for a moment. But if we had 2 successive periods of 90% of testing that came in, the 90th percentile was under 5 milligrams per liter. Is that the right unit? 5 milligrams per liter of lead, micrograms per liter, yes, 1,000 times smaller than milligrams. So micrograms per liter, that if we're under that 5, if the 90th percentile is under that 5, then we would be what's called deemed optimal. Ours came in around 4.4. So it's not that we have no lead, it's just that we're in this unique position where we're under the trigger that would cause the state to come in and tell us how to do things. So we're in this sweet spot where we can right now execute our program without a whole lot of state regulatory directive of how to do that. Recognizing that we're bumping up against the limit, which is 5 micrograms per liter. And if we have any test that triggers that 5 micrograms per liter, then it immediately kicks us into being regulated by the state. So we want to take advantage of that flexibility right now. And that's where implementing the program over the next 5 years. We had originally said 3 years. We think it's more reasonable to execute on a 5-year schedule, just from a practical point of view. If we can do it in a more accelerated fashion, we'll do that. But essentially, that testing came back, not that we have no lead, it's just that we're below the regulation, and we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can execute. So the steps for lead service line replacement. Step one, we contact the homeowner, sign and submit the enclosed consent within 7 days. And then step two will be the on-site visit. So every on-site visit will be a contractor in Englewood it's a representative of Englewood Utilities. So there's not going to be a contractor out there by themselves. It'll be the contractor and one of our staff. So that's a step in the program, and I think that was a concern that was raised. So we've addressed that by how we're going to interface with the customer. Assuming they sign the consent, there's no issue, then we meet with them on site. And then the replacement itself is really, it's a boring machine. We bore under the yard. It's parallel to the existing pipe, or does it pull the existing pipe through, or does it?
They could either pull it or drill in.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Real close to it.
yeah, so there's two ways to go in, but the point is they're not going to open cut everybody's front yard. What they will do is they'll cut like about a 4x4 cut out of the street above the water main, and then that's where they put the directional drill in to then meet at the house. Interestingly enough, I was driving downtown for a meeting that Sarah and I had, and if you're driving down Logan right now, past a whole bunch of these, it was like 3 blocks of just cut. They had 2 of the 3 lanes shut down because they're going through and just street by street. And then ultimately, once we replace the line, so the impact to the homeowner on it is about a day. And then once we replace the line, there'll be a 1-year warranty. I know that was a question that was raised. So there's a 1-year warranty, and then the customer side gets turned over to the customer. The utility side remains our responsibility. And then there's an option that we'll likely implement where we provide them a filter with a pitcher that has a filter that's certified to remove lead, just as an extra layer of precaution if there's any additional concern around that. So our schedule for community outreach, we are anticipating a bill insert coming this spring, a number of community events. You can see the number of those. So 4 community events, in-person community meetings. We anticipate 3, and then in-person consultations and door hangers for each individual property that's affected on a continuous basis. So we are trying to get this out there that we are doing this and get people involved. Ultimately, what's the point of this? There's a technology that was used prior to 1949 that we now know isn't necessarily the best technology for human health and lead, and we are trying to serve our customers and our citizens by taking that potential health risk out of the system through the greatest impact of that health risk out of the system through the lead service line, which is where the most concentrated level of lead is in our system. Ultimately, we're going to do that in a way that accommodates the available funding. And then what's been a concern for several months now is respecting property rights through that process, recognizing that we are trying to do good for the system and good for the community, but there's always competing priorities. So that is the outline of what we're proposing, and I'd open it up to turn it over to the chair for any questions.
Board, I'll open up. We're open for questions. If you want to, anyone wants to raise their hand and start. Marjan, I see your hand is up. Would you kick us off?
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering, Peter, how much is the cost for these units? I assume it's Breda units that is going to be given to people. How much would that? How much is you're proposing for that cost that you're going to go?
So those pitchers are $40. So we provide the pitcher, and then it would be incumbent upon the homeowner to replace the filter if once the filter gets used. And it's a very common, it's a common thing you can. So we would provide the initial filter and the initial pitcher, And then for as long as the homeowner wanted to keep changing the filter out, that would be up to them.
You know, Peter, I had the opportunity to come down at the facility and talk to Zach, and Mr. Josh was there as well. And we went over the report that actually Denver is using, which I personally, and I try to get Zach's attention to that, that this report is so, that research is so manipulated, so unscientific. That's the best word I can use for it. It's just a marketing tool to, I think somebody knew somebody that was able to get this. So that cost, you're looking at that cost, and I shared that with Josh, and I was like, I really have a problem with this. Like, we just doing things because Denver is doing it or other cities are doing it. Maybe they have the money or maybe they don't care. But I really have a problem with this. Here's the $40, and then they're going to get another, let's say $20 filter. That at best is that the first shot is going to give what they say it does. Even that is questionable because it's related to quality of the water it comes. I highly recommend you look at that research. And I really think in the meeting we had with Zach, and he wasn't able to show me because I think the time before that, he told me that he was part of that research, but I felt to see that he couldn't answer the questions that I was having about that. So I really feel like here's about for the price of half of that item, we are misleading. My number one problem with that is that we're misleading people thinking that they have a tool in their hand that is going to actually remove the debris out of their water, which it doesn't. So if they go and spend another $30 or $40, then they could have actually a reverse osmosis that actually removes 99.9% of the things out of their water. So I feel like that is just one, ethically, we're misleading people into a solution that is not a solution. Two, we're misusing the money. So I personally, I really have a moral, and I asked Josh if they could just put 2 pipes and run one of those Berettas, and I even offered I will put the money for them to see that this Beretta research and all it costs getting a couple of droppers, and they can see that it's really not efficient. You can create your own research, and it doesn't take that long.
So can I jump in?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So is your concern about the Brita filter at the end once we remove the line, or is your concern that we're removing the line?
No, I think removing the line is absolutely, I totally agree with you. I think we do have to remove, because the lead poisoning that it comes from that is one of the contribution. But I also don't believe that the lead poisoning only comes from the lead pipes. But
sure. And so there's so the most significant contribution to potential lead poisoning is the lead pipe. And the reason why is because that is a solid lead piece. Within water systems, you have lead in solder, and you also have lead in pipe joints that doesn't necessarily interface with the water, but could potentially to a small degree. So our program, the reason, so when I say we're following Denver on this, part of the reason why we're following Denver on this is because Denver spent several years working with CDPHE to implement a program that CDPHE was comfortable with. And we have met with CDPHE. And when we met with CDPHE, we talked to them, this was a couple months ago, or about a month ago, we talked to them about the fact that we now have this below 5 micrograms per liter. So technically, we are good to implement the program how we want. And even at that point in time, the head of the drinking water section of CDPHE said, but you're going to use Brita filters, correct? You're going to provide a customer who's had their line removed a Brita filter. And so I understand that your analysis of the data maybe is different than other scientists' analysis of the data. And that, a lot of times you get that with data. What I can tell you is that from a state perspective, we have to do what the state tells us to do. And the state has informed us that the Brita filter is their accepted approach once you either in anticipation of removing the line or taking the line out. And so when I talk about following Denver, it's largely so that we don't go through a similar drawn out protracted process with the state, because we already know where the state lands on this. And so I hear what you're saying. I'm happy that you agree with, I think everybody agrees that removing the line is the most important thing.
Correct.
So this becomes what's the simplest way to provide an additional layer of protection, and from our perspective, that the state approves and signs off on. And that's why we propose this approach.
I understand what you're saying. I just feel like when do we stop? We stop the wasting and stop the manipulation. That's where I feel like. But I understand. I don't want to take the board's and time, because I know your hands are tied with that too, Peter. I understand that.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more offline on this one, because I hear what you're saying actually. And when Josh and I were there was a couple questions I had around the state's interpretation.
Yeah.
But the one thing we know about the state is when they say they want something, they don't allow a whole lot of flexibility in terms of how to approach it. And so really, if you take a step back, the bulk of the money is being spent on removing the lines. Each line we estimate is about $10,000. The cost of the filter is, we think, is about $40.
Mhm.
And that's a temporary stopgap, either prior to removing a line or just after it's removed. And then beyond that, a customer has unimpacted water from a lead service line, which is
Maybe
truly-
hopefully we can make a statement in there that is saying this is the state recommendation. Please do your own homework, because I really think that when people get a recommendation from some sort of regulations, they think that people done their homework, and that is a really false assumption. And I understand people are busy, but I really think morally we owe it to the people to let them know that is not a solution. One, two. My other question, Peter, is that, so let's say they come. I kind of unfortunately I experienced this with my solars. When a company hires a contractor, they come and they do their thing and they leave. And then they leave a mess sometimes. I'm not saying this is the case with this scenario, but they leave a mess. And then 5 years later, the homeowner finds out what the unethical thing they did, because it took a little while for the wear and tear shows up, right? So my question is that when these people come and they put that in, and why is it one, they only warranty it for a year? One. Two is that how clear are we with what kind of a damage they create? Like, for instance, like if you've done your work in your yard and they come and they just leave a little mess behind, where is the description of these things so that people can have some sort of a bigger room? Because, you can't, why do they, if they're doing a good job, then why would they warranty it for 1 year?
So 1 year warranty is standard. I mean, it's, when we do work throughout the water system and the wastewater system, frankly, 1 year is just an industry standard. For 1 year gives enough time for, if there was some kind of a flaw or something, it usually presents itself within a year. As it relates to, and so it's industry standard. I mean, that's just a common industry approach, whether it's lead service lines or pumps or pipes, or, I mean, it's universal.
Mhm.
The second piece, which is how are we sure that they're not going to damage things? So in theory, the tunnel goes through the yard.
Mhm.
If there's a need for a meter pit, there'll be a localized excavation associated with the meter pit. The plan with that is to, correct me if I'm wrong, is to video that before and a video of that after. Am I saying this right?
Pictures, yep.
So pictures to document what it looked like before, document it afterward. Our goal is to be as minimally impactful as possible, recognizing that, things don't go perfectly on construction, but our overriding goal is we want to make it right for our customers. So we do have the ability to document through pictures and potentially video before and after. And that actually protects the contractor, actually protects the city, and it protects the contractor. Because if we're not doing that, someone could come in and say, you cut down my 200-year-old tree and you need to give me $20,000 because it was special or something like that. When, if we have that video, we can show, you know, what the work was, what the impact was, the limit, the scope and the extent, and then what the final product is. So that's how we do it.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad that that process is happening because it protects both sides. There's brings amount of clarity that is required. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate your
Thank
explanation.
you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I see we have Caitlin's hand raised. I can't see the room very well, but just to check in the queue, do we have other hands raised, so to speak, in the?
We have 3 in the room.
Okay, let's do one in the room. You guys decide who, then Caitlin, then we'll go back to the room.
I just had a quick question. By separating these out then, and then the work is done, does that mean access to the homes is removed then? So that that issue goes away and it's no longer something in the future?
If someone refuses to allow us access to the home, which we anticipate is a very, very small amount of people, because most people will be like, you're gonna get rid of my lead line and I don't have to pay for it. Great. But in those circumstances, essentially, this takes care of that. So we don't have to do it anymore. EPA says, if their rules pass, says you're not responsible anymore. However, we want to make sure we're tracking that. So if someone buys that house in the future, we can let them know you have a legacy lead service line that prior homeowner did not address, and you should address it. And if you'd like us to come in and help with that, we don't know what that program looks like in the future. But essentially, if someone lives in the house for the next 20 years and they want to keep their customer side as lead, then that's their prerogative.
But then it doesn't go away. What we're proposing for a motion.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Well, the inner working of having access to the home will continue then.
Well, so if someone refuses, then the access issue is gone.
Okay.
If someone allows, then we have our process for how we're going to work with them to get in their basement. And again, it's a small core.
Yeah.
It's either under the.
Ours is in the basement.
Yeah, so it's either through the foundation wall or it's in a crawl space. A lot of people have crawl spaces. So it's just taking it into that first fixture. And that's for the people that allow access, and which is the vast majority of people. Yes.
My question goes along with that. On page 18, under 12(1)(a)-11, inspection and access to the property. My question is, when was this amendment instituted? Is that what was instituted when council approved access to people's homes?
Yes, that was last fall.
And my question is that going to be overridden and we don't need that anymore? If we don't need that anymore, could that be changed back to what it was before?
Yes, I mean, off the cuff, I would say.
I think that was about doing the potholing and
Right.
and doing the inspection. Is if that process is completed.
That process is, not only is it completed, but the state has also relaxed their approach to that, so we can actually take them both outside. So we never actually had to utilize that provision because the state evolved they remember initially when we brought this forward, they wanted 3 points. They came back and said, we only need 2 points. Both of those can happen outside. So really, since we passed that rule, the state has relaxed their approach in terms of what qualifies. So from a, just off the cuff, I would say, yes, we can amend that out. The piece that we would not amend out is we still have to replace the electronic senders and meters. And so that's been in code for as long as we've had meters, because that's how we ensure that people are paying for the water. If someone is going to refuse us access to, and this is getting a little bit into what Sarah's going to talk about, but if someone's going to refuse us access to change a meter or change a sender, our approach is we estimate the bill, and then we estimate the bill and we double it, and then we estimate the bill and we double it, and we estimate the bill and we double it. And then what happens is people see that and we've had this where people see that their bill goes through the roof because they have not contacted us to let us change that sender out, and we have no way to confirm what they're utilizing. And then we go and change it, and then we reconcile and we give them a huge credit on their bill. We don't do that often, We've only probably had to do it a couple times in the last few years. But it is a mechanism to, a lot of things people didn't even realize that we're trying to contact them. And I think that was one of the most recent ones is people didn't realize we were trying to contact them. And then their bill is like, well, wait a minute, why is my bill $350? And then they called us and then they immediately gave us access. We changed it and we gave them a credit. So that's a mechanism to help encourage people to respond, because we do need to be able to change those things out.
Right, and so, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to fight that battle now. But my question is, so is the right thing to do to take it back and ask council to rescind it? Or what would, I mean, what's the danger of leaving it in here? Because it's a historical thing and it leaves the appearance that we approved it, and I know you didn't use it.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, I mean, I'm going off the cuff here a little bit. But I think what we could do is we could just amend that back to what it was. And as part of these amendments, amend that back out we never needed to use that provision and we don't need, and Vicky's about to.
Yeah, or there is, well, if I can just, so there is one additional change to that section that we were requesting, and that was changing out that the person doing any inspection would have a card signed by the city manager, and that we don't do that as a practice. So we just wanted to amend our codes so that that was consistent. I would also have to go back and look at the specific language of what it was before to see if there's something else we're missing, if we just said we are rescinding 12-1A-11. But perhaps what we can do is take out the proposed code change to 12-1A-11 as part of this proposed ordinance and address that separately.
Yes. I think
And it's not part of the package that's going forward as it's presently presented.
Right, but this
Yeah, because
board would have to approve that change, correct?
We'd recommend it, yeah.
Yeah, it impacts the water supply. That's why things come before.
I think when we did this fall, we had the provision was in there for the meters, and we want to keep the provision for the meters because that's important. What we did is we expanded the definition to include inspection. And so I think what your concern is that we never used it, so can we retract that back to just being about the meters? And that, just on principle, without going into a lot of discussion, on principle off the cuff, I don't necessarily think that impacts our program. And I think that brings us back to a level of comfort that I think was some of the concern last fall with council around that provision.
Right.
Maintaining,
Which I think everybody agrees that as a utility, we need to be able to access the meters and we need to be able to access the electronic senders.
I think the only, and Vicki and I can talk about this, is just the ability to inspect, whether that is on the outside, just beyond the curb stop or the meter that's on the homeowner side. But there were several homeowners that didn't want us to pothole in their yard, so they allowed us inside. So I think as long as we still maintain throughout the program the ability to inspect on the customer side, because we do need to know if that's a lead service line or what that material is, then we can work on the language.
absolutely.
So there's some mechanics of this that we don't want to screw it up. But I think if you think about think about a typical street, you have the back of walk, and then if you look at how Englewood's platted, like the first 10 feet is an easement, and that easement is for city services like meter pits. And so the inherent in the property description for the property is an easement on the back end of the property, which is typically covering the sewer side, and the front end of the property, which is typically covering the water side. And so if that easement is there, then it's inherently there because it's part of the property when it was established way back in the 30s, 40s, or 50s. It's when you get into these unique situations where maybe the line comes in at a different angle, maybe it's not in where that easement was defined. Maybe there was a property that was platted that didn't have that. And that's where we want to make sure that we don't restrict ourselves in those situations to be able to go and actually inspect both sides of that line to ensure that we can verify that. So I think that's the details of what we want to look at. But as it relates to, do we need to go into people's houses, which I think was the biggest concern? I think we can craft that out of it with the exception of meters, the meter and the meter sender. which is what we do now anyways. I mean, we've been doing that for years.
Thank you.
Let's do Caitlin and then Steve.
So my question was, and I kind of think you answered it in the discussion, but I was just wondering, what is the city responsibility that you would change if the property owner decided they didn't want to replace the service line? What is the utility responsible for replacing?
So what we would be responsible for is the line from the main in the street to either the curb stop, or if it's an outside meter set, the meter pit. Keep in mind that one of our programmatic approaches, and this somewhat gets to this whole property issues, we're trying to move all the meters outside of people's houses into meter pits. Eliminates this issue that people have with accessing the home and going inside. That's a much bigger programmatic thing that will take many, many years. But we can do that with a number of these lead service lines, where if we replace the line, we will establish a new meter pit in the yard, and then the access to the home at that point in time goes away, because everything between the pit and the homeowner's responsibility, not the city's concern. We are responsible for from that pit to the line, to the line in the street. So it's not a holistic program yet, but it is a longer term goal to move everybody to that consistently, with the exception of commercial. Commercial is already inside the building. You go in the building, there's usually a water closet, there's a room for it. There's usually bigger meters. This is on the residential side. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, and just to follow up, and that won't, because when you cut the lead line, you add more lead to the system. That's not a problem doing it that way.
So you create a minor disturbance. So you're talking about the person who refuses, and we leave this lead segment in to the customer. Is that what you're talking about on the customer side?
I mean, like if you replace your part, but you don't replace the customer part, is there a disturbance of that lead getting into the water?
It's low enough that the EPA has recommended it as an approach. I think it is a low disruption. However, that's kind of partly the risk of saying, no, we're not going to let you do it. But again, so we're balancing two things. We're balancing property rights and human health and safety. And we're trying to, and again, this is a national issue, which is why the EPA is considering this. And I think that's where they figured out the optimal approach that respects property rights and minimizes potential risk to the human health and environment, and basically makes that risk the homeowner's accepted risk, because it's their property. So they get to decide whether they want to fix the risk themselves or not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
That answered a couple of my questions, because I noticed that changed. When we had this discussion previously, Council, you said the whole kit and caboodle has to be replaced all at once, otherwise it's a risk to the system.
That is, and so it still is. We think it is. The degree, so if you maintain a lead service line connected to the system, there's still a system risk. If you have this piece, oh, I'm sorry, actually, thank you, because there's a component to this that I've forgotten. But if we do that there's some kind of a valve that prevents backflow from that lead service line back into the system. That's part of it. That's part of the technology. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you have to put a dielectric coupling in there to don't increase corrosion.
You have to do one of those. A dielectric coupling to ensure that doesn't backfeed back into the system. So thank you for reminding me, because that is part of it. It's not just you cut it off and leave it. There's a component that has to be installed on that line to ensure protection of the rest of the system that has been removed of lead.
Okay, and then briefly, I just wanted to address Councilwoman Russ's comments. I'm okay deferring any changes to the 12.1A11 section to a later discussion. I'm okay with it as it's written now. I wouldn't make any change to the proposal. My last question is in regards to the potential for additional costs to the customer. We have this requirement of a curb stop, and we know that some of our properties don't have those. I'm not even entirely certain that mine does. And if it does, I have no idea where the heck it is. Is there the potential for additional costs to be incurred by the customer through this process?
So if the customer allows us to do the replacement, our proposal, now all this has to be approved by council in terms of funding, because there's a funding component to this that we have to talk about in May. Our intent would be that a customer with this issue sees no cost and gets the issue fixed.
Okay.
And that's for the 3,000-ish customers in our service area that have the problem. So 28 to 30% of the customers. That's the intent. Now, that's for this program. If they refuse, down the road, and so then you get to, and as I've thought about this, then you get to the point of like, well, the previous homeowner refused this, but I don't want to refuse this. So how come I'm stuck with this issue? And then it becomes but we can think about that down the road. And maybe the city wants to, if we have most of it removed at that point in time, maybe it is a more simple approach to on a one-off case by case, be able to be more empathetic to the customer's issue, because when you have to replace one of these lines, it's not cheap. This time last year, I was replacing my sewer service line. It cost me $9,000 because it backed up into my house. And so they're never expenses that you plan for or want to have happen, which is why we want to minimize the impact. Through this program, our proposal that we'll be bringing to the board and council is that a customer experiences no impact and gets a copper line new meter pit. As it relates to curb stops, Josh and I have been talking about this. Josh's response is, why do we even have these? Because he thinks that with an outside meter pit, we can actually potentially eliminate the curb stop as well. So that's actually something that we're evaluating. Haven't talked about it publicly yet because we haven't worked through all the mechanics of that, but that could be part of what this program does is takes away the curb stop. And then if you have an outside meter pit, then you can do everything you need to do in that meter pit. So you can shut it off on the customer side, or shut it off on the city side. You do all your things through the meter pit. And then this extra valve of a curb stop is not necessarily needed anymore. We haven't worked through, so don't quote me on any of that because we haven't worked through all the mechanics of that yet. But that is something that we're considering as we look at this program. Like I look at my house, and I have a meter pit, and I can't tell you where the curb stop is. I can't find it. So I don't know, but what they took it out.
And so almost every house has a curb stop. What happened is they were installed in 1960, 1955. It's a box that's this big.
Yeah.
No one's touched it in 70 years in dirt and soil and grass clippings. It's probably there because we get these calls often when someone needs a water shut off. We need help with them. We got their metal detector. We brought it around. There it is. People always say, "Oh, what is this? I did not know this was in my yard." So this is your curb stop that controls the water. So I really yet to see a house that hasn't had a curb stop.
Okay.
But most people think they don't have one. Or like, I don't have one of those. Like, well, you probably do. It's just you haven't seen it in 45 years.
I assume there's probably some fee for locating, dig it out, and all that.
Generally, I mean, that curb stop's not ours. But if someone calls and says, "I need something shut off, can you help me?" But generally, we respond and kind of point the right direction. Metal detector out there. But
cool.
Yeah, if it's like to dig it up and expose it all, we kind of go back and forth. And I will work on that. It's like, well, this isn't public. So working on that as well.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to say real quick, I appreciate all the changes that have been made in this package. This is vastly more acceptable to me than the original draft. And I think all of the concerns that I raised in the last meeting have been addressed tonight. I really appreciate that. So.
Well, we appreciate that too. And this is when the process works great, is we propose, we get feedback, we go back, we make adjustments. And I just appreciate the board and council working with us as we move through this to try to figure out what's the best way to balance property rights and human health and safety. And I appreciate that comment because that says that maybe we probably got a little bit closer in the mark.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'll add, Peter, I mean, I want the board to understand we were given a gift since our last meeting. The changes that were able to be offered now are because again, the changes in the pending regulations and it's now literally from where we were last month, the idea that we can go this route, it was not nearly on the table last month like it is now because of that change. So we really did get lucky, if I understood that correctly, right, Peter?
I always like the word fortunate.
We really were fortunate.
Random.
I mean, I just say that after the
it
last
is.
meeting, I was really worried. I mean, we had a really tough thing, but we were very fortunate that we got some changes that could just allow the board to reach consensus in a much quicker fashion. So we were fortunate.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that answer. One is the LCRI proposed rules. The feedback caused us to go and research that more. So that was out there. We just received the feedback and then dug more and found that, and that's what helped us accommodate that. The fortunate piece was the testing on the 90th percentile, the 6-month testing on the 90th percentile. That was, we were fortunate, and again, we're close, so we're in this somewhat of a sweet spot. So I think there's two answers to that question, but yes, it's part of it is because we went back and researched more. Part of it is we got, all right, I'll say it, we got lucky on the testing.
We do need to move on. Marjan's going to handle it. I want to see, does anyone else have questions before we do Marjan, and then we'll move on? Rita as well. Okay. And we'll still give another shot, but Marjan, go ahead. Try to keep it short if we can.
Absolutely, John.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you. I actually have the same concern as Steve raised, which Peter answered it beautifully. I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Rita?
And I just want to thank you too. When I read this, I was really excited about the change, and it was even better than I expected that it would be. So I'm very thankful for that. I have one question. Is it possible that the city attorney could look at some of the discrepancies that the citizen brought forward to see if there needs to be some changes?
Absolutely,
Sure.
we'll take that back.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's some grammatical things or some stuff that's in conflict, yeah, we can do it. And we appreciate the detailed review of it.
Right. Thank you so much.
So Peter,
So we have a motion.
Yes, I was gonna say, we're gonna put that up. All right, can I get a motion for agenda item 5A as written?
So moved.
Anyone want to do a second?
Second.
All right, figure we all knew that was coming. Funny to say, but further discussion? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, great. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now on to water meter code changes.
Okay, Sarah is here. She's going to present this one. We think the next two items, we can probably be they're not gonna be as long as the first item. So hopefully we can get everybody out by 6:30 if that's okay, if that works with everyone's schedule. We can get through these next two probably fairly quickly. Chair, thoughts on that?
I don't see anyone rushing for the door, so hopefully that's acceptable. Please proceed.
Okay.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you. So this is the flat rate to meter service and meter exchanges piece that we pulled out as a result of feedback from last month as a separate item. And there's code amendments that we are suggesting you move forward. So I'll give you some background. So we have 1,183 flat rate customers remaining. Since last month, Vicki did some research and found that actually, as required by state law, since April 1990, all water providers are to enforce metered service. So I think Peter has mentioned several times that he thought flat rate flat rate services went away in the 90s. He was correct, because there was a state law.
Sometimes, you know what, sometimes you get lucky.
Yeah. And so there was some timelines for compliance. There, a certain number of meters had to be replaced by a certain time period. We are well beyond that. The final date was 2005, when there was supposed to be 100% compliance of that. So we have been out of compliance with that state law since then.
So I would just like to say that as we look at this utility, it's like peeling back an onion. And thankfully, Victoria found this state law and then looked into it, and it confirmed the suspicion that we had, but it truly confirms it that it is a law, and the city's been out of compliance with it for 19 years. So we're gonna fix that too.
Wow. This was included in the 2020 master plan, and it is addressed in the current code. So within 90 days, a transfer of property, that new property owner is required to install a meter, and that has been in code for several years. That is also required when the property use changes. So if it moves from a residential to a commercial or industrial project property, then that change is required as well. The other thing in code is that when it is deemed in the best interest of the city, we can require customers to change to meter service. So we wanted to recommend these code changes to really refine and define what that process looks like. Our proposed code amendments establish the requirement for metered service to again address the state law that's been in place since 1990. It defines the city and customer responsibilities regarding converting from flat rate to metered services. And then it establishes a piece of the customer outreach. We wanted to balance being too prescriptive in code with what those outreach pieces would be. So my next couple slides are our proposed outreach for different cases of meter replacement or exchanges. And then it establishes penalties for non-compliance. So that's if we're not receiving communication back from customers, then it's the billing piece that Peter talked about. So for flat rate conversion, for new properties, the process isn't recommending to change this. The title status triggers that notification of a flat rate to the property owner, and they are required to convert to metered service within 90 days of that property sale. Because of the lead service line component of this, there are several customers that have purchased a property and they are on a list because they have a lead service line. We didn't have policies in place to put in a meter while with a lead service line. So we have those customers, we have it listed. They would be a part of the lead reduction program. So new recommended customer outreach efforts for existing flat rate meters when we are ready to start replacing or start installing meter pits would be to send a notification letter out 30 days in advance of when we would like to schedule that. If no response is received from a customer, we would send a second letter requiring 14 days or requiring response within 14 days. And then if that's again, no immediate response, we would post a blue tag. So blue tags we use frequently for if there's issues at a property, we post a blue tag and just let them know to contact utilities immediately. And then if there's continued no response, there's penalty provisions that we are recommending in the code changes here, which could either be fees or service shut off. The meter pit installation would be scheduled once the customer has paid for that meter and installation. And then our proposed outreach for meter exchanges for outside set meters. We actually don't need to interact with customers. We do this today where we go out and if we need to exchange a meter, we do that, or exchange ERTs. Field crews will always knock on the door first to let them know if someone's home, let them know that what we're planning to do, and that it'll take very little time most likely. For inside set meters, we would again send a letter requiring they contact utilities within 30 days. Then if no response, send a second letter requiring response within 14 days. Again, if no response, post a blue tag on the property. And then if there's still no response, we get into that doubling of the water bill each time. And again, once the meter exchange is complete, the credit is issued to the customer, because at that point in time, we will know how much water has gone through the meter, and we can do the math to credit them what they would be owed. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Do we have any questions for Sarah?
I have one.
I'll kick it off. I'm trying to understand how this law has been in place since 1934. And I'm sorry, for 34 years, not 1934. And this is when we're coming up, because of all the years I've been on the Water and Sewer Board, we've talked about the desire to, move off of these meters. Maybe my question's rhetorical, but I'm floored by the fact that we didn't have a choice in this matter. Is there just any more perspective than about why this is news to us?
So I would say that, really what this took was it took research. And I think this is where Deputy City Attorney McDermott came in and researched this for us and actually dug in and found that there was this rule that was passed way back in 1990. I mean, we can't address what happened all the way through, I can't address anything prior to 2020. And from 2020 to here, like I said, it's been a sense of mine, and I was actually surprised, but I didn't have the connection to the rule because the rule was enacted. I mean, I was still in high school when the rule was enacted, so I wasn't really thinking about it. So I think sometimes it's just the moment creates the drive for the research produces the results, and then we find out that maybe this was something we missed. This isn't the first time we've had this with the utility. I think I may have mentioned this, that on the McClellan Dam, there's survey points. We're supposed to be surveying those every 5 years. The last time those were surveyed was 1995. But the state engineer inspects it every year. And so they never picked it up. Once we hired staff to actually focus on this, they figured it out and realized, well, wait a minute, we haven't done this. So I think part of this is that operation of the utility really focused on just producing water and not looking much beyond it, and being really, really lean and low funding, under, all those things. I think it's probably how we got here.
It's kind of, this board had not just the board, but, we have a lot of attorneys involved because of the importance of the water that we deal with. It's just kind of amazing. It does make me then ask two other questions. One, are we certain about its applicability to us now? No homeroom charter exemption or some other reason why it wouldn't apply. But maybe I had the second question. Most importantly, if it does apply, with how much speed do we need to be operating to get into compliance? Is it one of those things that's required but never to be evaluated, no penalty for not complying? What does it mean that we're not in compliance?
So I can address some of that. So there are exceptions to this law that were passed, but they don't apply to the city. There wasn't an exception for home rule charters or home rule municipalities such as Englewood. And we discussed that internally with staff, and the exceptions aren't applicable to us. So that's one issue. And then in terms of penalties, the act didn't specify any specific penalties for non-compliance. So it's not, we don't believe that we are subjected to a penalty at this time.
Okay.
And also concerning the distribution collections over the past 6 months has replaced upwards of 100 flat rate meters. So if there's 1,100 remaining, that's 10% of our flat rates that we have So it's not as if nothing's occurred over the past 34 years, but over the past 6 months, I'll get the exact numbers if people are interested, but it's been 70, 80, 90, 100 flat rates that our staff has installed the meters for. So work is moving forward, even though before we do this rule.
Those are property transfers?
Those are property transfers. Yeah.
And so when I first started, the number that I heard was 1272. And I just talked to Sarah this afternoon, and I think it's 1183. And so that would track with, it's about 90 of them have been replaced. And we had a backlog for a period of time because, again, we were triaging at different aspects of the utility at that point in time. This became one of those things that now we have staffing resources and a program and a plan to marry this in with the whole lead service line program. So part of this has just been plan development. As it relates to execution of it, while there is no penalty right now, it's not to say that they wouldn't potentially enact one in the future. So we're going to operate under the approach of we're going to do this as soon as practicably possible within the budgets that we have. Fortunately, I suspect that a large percentage of these are also lead service lines. And so we anticipate that a large number of them will get addressed over the next 5 years as we replace lead service lines.
Question, Marjan's got her hand up if there's, and I'll ask again.
Quick question. So that's what I was assuming, that a lot of these gets fixed while you do the pipe change. But if there is a minority of people that they just need to change their meter, how much would it be the cost of that for them? I mean, because they got 30 days to respond and they got 40. I mean, what if the cost is so high that they can't afford it? I mean, is that something we should consider, Peter?
So, I appreciate the question. If it's just a meter replacement, we have meter inventory. There is no cost to the customer if it's an existing meter and we're replacing it. There is a cost to the customer if it's a new meter pit. But as far as replacement of electronics or the meter, there is no cost.
But that's a good point. So all these flat rate customers will have to pay a fee for the meter. It's $321
$321.82 for this year.
is the current rate for it.
Yep.
And we recognize that is a hit on the bill. If we need to work with someone about a payment plan to absorb that. So they pay for the meter. We provide the labor and resources to do the installation. So it's a partnership in terms of that we do so that they're not faced with finding a contractor, paying for a contractor to install it. We install it, we cover those costs. We just have the customer pay for the meter. And if there is truly an issue with budgeting or paying their bill, we will always work with people if they need to spread it out over a series of months.
Thank you.
I think that gets to my question, if I may, Chair.
Yes, please.
On page 43 of the packet, which is page 2, item C talks a bit about cost. And there's a clause here that says, provided, however, that it shall be the property owner's responsibility to reimburse the city for the cost of the meter upon installation at rates set by the fee schedule. When I look at the city's fee schedule, I'm having difficulty locating exactly what that rate is. So can you give me the source of that $312 or whatever? What line item is that on our fee schedule?
I'm not sure if it's ever been on the fee schedule. It would be something that we add with these changes to the code amendment. So that had not been a rate that we were putting. It's basically the cost of the parts, and so we determine that.
Labor as well.
And labor's not, and we
take care of
cover the
labor.
labor. Yeah, so it's just the parts. So
your question is, with these proposed changes, we're going to add transparency to that cost by making sure that it's now on the schedule. Whereas in the past, it wasn't there. It was just charged and people were told you need to pay $321.
Right. That's the first part. But the second part is this code revision that we're proposing proposes a fee that is not currently supported by our fee schedule. It references the fee schedule. It references a fee on the fee schedule that does not currently exist.
Yeah, so this was a cart and horse thing of which one comes first, I would think. If we put it in code and then we could amend the fee schedule, but we'd have to take that back to council.
We'd have to amend the fee schedule, which would go back to council. I mean, if we pass this as written, we would have a reference to a fee that was not something we can charge at the moment because it's not in the fee schedule. So we would have one bid. Yes, we'd have one bid in place, and then we still need the
Yeah,
secondary piece.
that's a good catch. We'll have to go back and think about how to address that to ensure that we continue to collect the fee, because we do. They're buying the parts basically, but also make sure that we don't get in conflict as it relates to what's written in the fee schedule. So it's a good catch. Should we? How fast can we amend the fee schedule to include this?
I believe the fee schedule is approved by resolution. So that I'd have to look at. We'd all have to look at the council agenda.
Okay.
To assess when that can get.
So the risk would be we put this in code, we don't have a fee, so we technically couldn't charge it for the gap between now and when we enact the change of the fee schedule. So if that's a matter of a couple months, we could just hold these until we actually get that all resolved, and then we resume these. I think that might be an approach to do this. So that way we get it in code, and then we come back within the next month or two to say, yep, we're gonna add this fee based on the code changes we just approved. And then functionally in the field and execution, we pause until we get all that reconciled, and then we continue to move forward at that point. I think that would be the easiest way to address it.
Yeah, because really what we're trying to formalize here is a business practice. It's just been a business practice that we charge for those parts. Those parts are reevaluated every year. And now, as Peter mentioned, it's transparency that'll be provided at the beginning of the year.
Who approves changes to the fee schedule?
Council. Well, we bring it through this board for recommendation, and then ultimately council would approve that amendment to include that fee.
That was my next question. Does it have to go through the board first? But you're saying yes, it does.
Yeah.
The related question
Okay.
I have is, these 1,100 meter customers, it should be obvious that these are probably all fixed income customers because of the process that we engaged in for flat rate meter. If there's been any transfer of the property since we installed meters, so most of these people are going to be elderly, I would assume, the customer base.
I don't know if we could make that direct connection. And I'll give you an anecdotal story that I think addresses that. So house up the street from me just got flipped. They had an open house last Friday. I walked in, checked it out, and the flipper was like, yeah, we've got this flat rate here. And he's like, never seen that before. And he said, it's actually pretty awesome. He said, the bill is only $135 a month. And he said, I live out in Lakewood, and it's closer to $150 a month. And he had another person come into the open house before I could say, but wait, if you install a meter, that bill will go from 135 probably down to closer to 75 or $80 a month. And so this actually helps fixed income people in the sense that if you're on a flat rate, you're paying a calculated premium to assume that you're going to be one of those people that just sends a ton of water through. By going to a metered service, most people we see actually experience a decrease in their bill, which is why it's advantageous for specifically people on fixed income to do this as fast as possible.
And that kind of gets to my other question, which would be, this large upfront cost or larger upfront cost that may not be in some of these people's budget. We've talked about being able to work with them and amortize that over time, but I didn't see anything in the code that indicated that that's what we would do.
That's a business practice that we don't actually have in code because it provides us flexibility with working with people who have difficulty paying their bill. So there was a customer that has entered into, since 2008, has entered into, I think it was 28 agreements of, didn't pay their bill, was almost getting shut off. And we said, yep, we'll work with you. 28 times we did that. And finally got to the 28th time. She wanted to speak to me. I talked to her and I said, we're not doing this anymore. We are wasting way too much staff time. And really, she was using the red tag to trigger her to pay the bill. And we were being overly accommodating. And so I think this is the balance of how much is prescriptive in the code versus how much is a business practice of how we would implement. And I think that starts to get into that too prescriptive, because if we don't follow exactly the implementation, then it doesn't necessarily account for the uniqueness of a particular individual's circumstance.
Yeah, I understand that. I just think, going back to the discussion we had last month, when we don't have something in the code that obligates us to behave in a certain way, it leaves an opportunity for something that can be perceived as abuse. And that's my concern here. I'm not proposing any particular change.
Yeah.
When this comes in front of council, there's, a chance that I might, but I don't have any sage suggestions right now. So with nothing to offer, I'll bring up that concern.
I think, so the business practices of working with customers to do payment plans and things like that, that's been in place for probably 3 decades. And so that's not something that changed as soon as I got here. It was a practice that was a matter of practice of how the utility has interfaced with its customer as a matter of course for decades. So I recognize what you said last month is like, well, what if there's a new regime that comes in and says, well, we're not going to do this anymore. I think that's when you would, I don't necessarily think in something like this that the pattern of behavior would dramatically change, because it's we are a customer service based industry or organization. So we are truly a customer service based organization because we provide a product to customers. So I don't know that necessarily changes. And then if someone were to come in and say, no more, whatever, I'm fairly sure that feedback would make it back fairly quickly of how the utility has changed its approach, at which point then there could be direction provided back through. So it's you try to write a code to accommodate every situation, and it's hard. And if you get too prescriptive, then what happens is you limit the ability to be flexible to deal with circumstances that you're not thinking about. So I don't know if that directly answers, I don't know if it addresses the concern entirely, but some of this is just, what's the history, matter of practice, approach, industry standard type of answer to it, that there may not be a specific code thing that's written.
Let me slide something in, Rita, and then next. Pieter, to the extent we actually expected costs to go down, seems like one solution would be to continue to charge the flat rate until the balance of the cost is paid off. So almost offer the individual the option between paying up front or paying, again, just stay on your fixed fee until it gets settled up, and then shift to true. Could we do something like that as a board supported measure for the staff still to be able to implement?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I think that's something that we could easily implement as a business practice. That actually, there's no impact. There's no immediate impact because they're paying what they currently pay.
Right.
They get through the payment of the meter and the fee, and then it drops off.
Well, and think about even the case where they're paying more and we never get paid for the meter. Take the extreme, but that means we're getting more fees than we would have received had they still been on the fixed fee. So even the city, even in that scenario, is still winning, or the utility is still winning. And I just throw that out, maybe Steve, something like that. If we just had board support for the staff's practice, it's not codified, but it's still at least a little more documented. So just a thought.
Yeah.
Rita,
with any of
go ahead.
I'm sorry. With any of these, the issue is here. The issue is true fairness for cost of service. And so a meter truly assigns the cost of that person's usage of water. Whereas a flat rate, if you use less water, then you're subsidizing everyone else. If you use way more water, then everyone else is subsidizing you. And so anytime we're talking about, anytime we're talking about how we're addressing these costs, the more we can dial them in to be fairly representative of the user's actual cost to the system, that's what we're trying to get closer and closer to. And this flat rate conversation definitely deals with a lot of that.
Rita?
So my issue goes back to what you brought up at the beginning, Chair Moore. It seems to me like there has been something. Did we not put it, because we've known this since 1990 or before, did something not get put in at the county level where when a property changed hands that it would come up? Because did the city not keep track of it? I mean, I think that happens somewhat with the concrete fund. Is there something out there that it was ever tied to the property? So I guess why I'm asking, why do we still have 1,183 left? And along with what you were saying before, if we're going to give these people a break, because I do think that things are getting tight and they're probably going to get tighter, allowing them to apply the difference between, go ahead and put the meter in and apply the difference of what they were paying towards the meter so that it would pay off the meter rather than the city making the money.
Yeah, we think that's a great idea, and I think that's something we can definitely implement. And it might be just a matter of practice of how we do it. And then no, well, I mean, give people any options. Sometimes people like just getting the bill paid for. As it relates to the first part, I think if you recall when I first came to council, 4 years ago, we're coming up on, wow, it is like 4 days from my 4-year anniversary. And I only know that because it was the day before we sent everybody home for COVID. But 4 years ago when I was coming to council, I remember bringing this up and saying I was shocked by the fact that we had 1,270 flat rates, because I thought this went away in the 90s. And I'm sure if we went back to, to the tape of those meetings, you would see that that same surprise was something that I brought to the question. So what I know since I've been here is that we have built a whole lot of systems that used to just be on paper or used to just be someone's. We have systems to actually track these things, and this is across the entire utility. We've had paper systems. If you remember the whole thing with the backflow prevention program, that's because we took what was supposed to be a 5-year implementation. We did it in 9 months because it was all paper documents and there had been no part of implementation. So we went from 0 to done in 9 months because the previous 5 years, it was just paper systems. And I think it goes back to the systemic approach to underinvestment in the utility. I mean, it's a complex organization. I think when you're on this board, you see all the myriad of complex issues that we're constantly trying to manage and prioritize and execute efficiently. Why it got dropped back in 2005, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. From 2020 to here, I think the thing is now, the thing that I was pleased about is we actually did find that there's a rule. Because I always well, I'm not sure what's up, but we found the rule. And so then that makes it a whole lot more simpler to say, yes, we need to do this.
So the rule goes back to 1990, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother got a meter in her house in 1990, and it cost her $90. And it did cut her water usage at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what we're trying. So
Peter,
we're trying to finally close that loop. Yes.
Let me break this into two issues. One is, I'm honestly, frustrated that this law's been around this long and it's not been available to guide our prior decisions, but that's just me complaining. What is the mechanics? The rule that the meter is supposed to go in when the property transfers. What's the mechanics for making that happen? Is that something driven by utilities? Is it something driven by the title transfer process?
Yeah, so I can address that. It is a part of the title transfer process. So once that title is pulled and the final bill is relayed from the utilities department to the title company, there is a check mark. Is this a flat rate meter? And if it is, that is that notification to the new owner that they are then informed they need to replace or they need to install their meter within 90 days. So it's tracked internally through utilities from that point. They then get put on a list. There was some backlog in several years leading up to this year when the O&M staff has been able to go in and really attack that list. And then there's been this lead service line issue. So there's been supply chain issues as well. So we're really now to the point where we can enforce it and stay ahead of it. With the lead program, we will accomplish several of these, but it is tracked through the utilities department.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak that certainly the board, I would say my perspective historically, the board has thought, this is natural attrition would eventually fix this problem. It is kind of amazing. It's still holding. It's 1100 or still lingering. If I want to move us towards, let me ask one more thing. The motion in front of us is to permit, would ultimately is just permitting utilities to push forward with these changes, but no, there's nothing about this that sets the time frame that it's going to happen or how it gets rolled out. Am I understanding that correctly? This just opens the door for you to be more aggressive about making these changes?
Yes, I hesitate to put a time frame on it yet because we don't necessarily have a comprehensive plan other than we anticipate the lead service program will address most of these. So we know we will be making a significant amount of progress on this through that program. So we'll be accomplishing two things at once. In the meantime, what we'll do is we'll figure out the remainders that are not lead service lines but are still on flat rates, and those we would program internally with Josh's staff so we attack this two different ways. The lead program we anticipate will address most of them. Any of the remainders we will quantify while we're executing lead service line program, and then have that be a priority of our crews with Josh. So as I think about how this executes, it executes in parallel. And when we complete the removal of the lead service lines, we've completed the flat rate conversion.
Okay. It does just seem like in moving 1100 or so people off of or onto meters, it needs to be some kind of understood, stated, I want to say non-discretionary approach, but something that does is systematic, much like the idea was, well, every time the title transfers, we make the change. We want something here that looks, a deliberate.
Well, without it being in the motion, we could, I'm comfortable committing to keeping it in parallel with that lead removal program. Because that really is the critical path of this is lead removal. And we don't want to do it before we remove a line. We want to do it while we're removing the line. So we can do that and accomplish all the other ones that are not lead at the same time, so that the end of that lead removal program, this is accomplished as well.
Okay. I'm going to ask that we get a motion in a second and then have final discussion. So if anyone's on board with that idea, please make a motion to approve item 5B as written.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, further discussion, and I'll open it up just for the formal part here, that I like the idea that I'm supporting this. I think this is a good thing. I do think the idea of it being first done in parallel with the lead replacement is good, and then, you know, with what's left over, if there's a substantial number left over, you know, developing a plan of attack at that time, and you know, with the board would be happy to give input. But as far as the motion goes, I'm supportive of it. Anybody? Let's see, anybody else? Floor is open. I'll take it to a vote then. I'm sorry, go
Chair, if
ahead.
I could add one more thing. As we've been talking about this, I thought of one other area where we did commit to a timeline, which is the water efficiency plan. We did commit to converting all of our flat rates to metered service as part of the next implementation phase of the water efficiency plan, which I think had an outside window of 10 years on it. So I would recommend that we go faster than that. But if there's a true backstop of what's been approved by the state as it relates to this, that was approved by the Water Conservation Board. So there is another area that we have committed to a timeline.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Peter, any chance we can still kick 7A to the next meeting?
We can. I think it's how are we doing? How's next meeting look?
Busy, but
Busy? Yes, we can. We have an issue that we want to address at some point, but we would like to get feedback from the board and the council. Yes, I guess, yes,
Okay.
we can.
We just have already asked the board to stay longer than the 6:30. And same on 7B, or is there something quick we want to do there?
7B is really quick. And
Hey,
it's
go
good
for it.
news. So the good news is that Sarah and I went down to the Water and Power Authority last Friday, and they approved our application for the SRF loan and the infrastructure money. So that is $40 million, 10 million of which is grant, which is principal forgiveness money. And that is the first money that we access. The second piece of it is infrastructure loan money. And then the third piece is state revolving fund loan money. So that is huge to allow us to move forward with the implementation of this program. We'll be talking with the board and council in the coming months as to what that all looks like from a programmatic perspective as it relates to rates. I think I've mentioned to this board before, that we do anticipate that there will be a small fee that's associated with the lead removal program that couples that whole financial plan and allows us to move forward with all the projects that we have momentum on, as well as provides us the ability to gain access to this $10 million of free money. So we'll bring more news in the April or May discussion. But really it was really good news last Friday. So and Sarah has done work for months and months and months with the state revolving fund and the state, and to get this approved on consent, it was really it was a good day last Friday, because it's a big deal.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. I won't deny the board members their choice. If there's anything else that a board member would like to raise.
I would, real quick. I just wanted to know, is it South Platte Renewal that is doing the lining of that sewer line on Oxford? Or are we doing something with that?
That is the city's stormwater enterprise. So that's through city's public works department.
Okay, so they would have any information about that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Anybody else? All right. I appreciate everyone. Great discussion tonight. I appreciate the extra time we put in. And everyone have a good evening. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
I
Yes.
marked the street.
Hey, congratulations.